All right, everyone. It is the second episode of the Jackals for the Advanced Tactics. We're going to be covering their custom army. Yeah, a lot of work has went into this. I just want to say upfront that I really appreciate, especially the Jackals community, all the feedback, especially Devious. Devious has really helped me a lot with this army. Just others as well. Yeah, just thanks everyone for all your help. And yeah, let's get into this. This army has sort of become a favorite of mine. I think that I wasn't into Jackals as much until I started getting into the army. It's like I almost want to start a Jackals army now. But alas, I have to pick and choose be very strategic this days in my hobby. But hey, like, subscribe, and comment as well. Trying to get to 1,000 subscribers is my next goal. So yeah, if you could also share this as well, that would be awesome. All right, and let me know what you guys think of the army as well. As I want to say with this and all these armies right now, I still consider all these armies to sort of be beta test armies. So would love to get feedback on them. I've already made changes to some of my previous armies as well, so I've played with them. So this army as well, I actually want to try this army out and then just, see how it does and make tweaks accordingly. So don't feel that any of these armies are set in stone. All right, so just to continue on with our assumptions, we're always assuming that this is just against the other official or competitively balanced armies. I'm always thinking about a 5 or 6 game GT. That's very important. I always like to point out these things that I'm doing for advanced tactics is for competitive play. So I want to make sure that I'm caveating that I'm really talking about making an army play well in like I said, a competitive, 6-game GT environment. Somewhere around 3,000 points, and generally no allies. I think that's eventually going to have to change when we get into something like Titan Lords and maybe like Gestures. But that's the general premise, is that there wouldn't be any sort of allies in this. All right, let's look at the criteria. I'm always looking for flexibility or a strong playstyle, raw efficiency, a good spell list, impactful elites, and cheap chaff, meaningful upgrades, access to Caster 3 and Advanced Tactics, Scat and Ambush, access to AP4, or at least AP3, and then to be undead. So I don't always want all these armies to check off all these boxes, but this is sort of the criteria that makes an army good. And my idea being, how can we combine different combinations of these things to still make the army feel flavorful, but also, be competitively viable. So with Jackals, just an overview of what I've done with the army. I've definitely added some morale mitigation options. So, it's one of the things that I think that Age of Fantasy is a better designed game than Grimdark Future is a lot of times there are a lot more consistencies in their armies. A lot of armies get very similar upgrades and, especially regarding things like, just standards. So, I don't think that Grimdark Future, I don't want all the armies to play exactly the same, but I have found as I've played a lot of this game that there are just certain things that sort of have to be in all armies, and one of which is sort of a way to mitigate morale. I've made elites a lot more flexible. I think elites is where I've made a lot of changes to. I've added some upgrades. I've really tried to both make this army, give them a buff, but also just really give some flavor to this army. I've at times reduced the def to balance out some of the carnivore. I think actually this provides a bit of flavor too. Jackals are sort of, I'll get into that into the army list, but the idea is that Jackals are sort of don't have this abundance of resources according to their lore. So the idea of sort of them pooling their resources and armor into certain units and having a lot of units not have armor, I think also sort of fits too. It also just helps out with the points. I've also modified some of the weapons. I've generally lowered, if they have a rule like Carnivore, Jackals really are going to benefit from having closer ranged weapons. I think this also sort of benefits some of the scrap mechanic, where basically all their weapons for their scrap versions aren't quite as good as the original, which would sort of make sense. If you're calling something a scrap rifle, why would it be just as good as a normal rifle? So I'm also thinking about this in terms of flavor as well. And I've reworked the monsters to provide some flexibility and playability. And so we're going to look at all this stuff according to more. I did a lot of work on this army. So this army, unlike perhaps others, well, a lot like, I've worked on several D tiers, and all those armies, they are a substantial difference from the original because the recent, ones I've done are, you know, D tier armies, what I consider D tier armies. So let's look at that as well. Always sort of keep in mind that I think there is a lot of good armies in Grimdark Future. It's just sort of the nature of what's been happening with this series, where a lot of people have been reaching out to me to more focus on worse armies than better ones. So I do think there's a lot of really good armies in Grimdark Future. It's just this series has taken a bit of a negative turn in the sense that that seems to be where the community wants me to focus. And I've tried to listen to the community to really focus on some of the armies that, I feel just need more work. If you're sort of an A and B tier army, you don't need as work as something like a D tier army. And, Jackals were just, were one of those armies that really people wanted me to do. All right, well, after that, we'll look at the competitive list. All right, so here is the Jackals competitive redesign. Again, this is just a 0.1, so I still consider this to be sort of a beta test here. And we'll go through the army. I won't go through all the special rules. We'll look at that as we go through the unit. So, first thing that I did with the spells is I've really tried to add in a pretty strong morale boost. And I'll get into my philosophy about what I've done with the suggestions. But let's just get into the spells where I've added a +1 to hit on the turn they charge. Feral Strike stayed the same. So I've added actually for my Shaman, who's the only spellcaster, a pretty substantial morale buff, a +2 morale on 2 units. That's pretty huge. Now that takes up a level 2 slot. So this is a really good spell, but it is taking up a level 2 slot. And then I've kept the regen on them as well. Just a level 3 regen is always really nice. One thing I have is I've tweaked some of the spells. I think I've put Quill Blast as an 18-inch range blast 9. So I've sort of given them a little bit more. I've also given them the Deadly. The Power Maul has moved from being an AP2 Deadly 6 to an AP4 Deadly 3. I don't like the level 3 version of Deadly, which is AP2 Deadly 6. It's way too swingy. It's not as good, I think. So I've switched those two out. Also just given him an ability to just, with the Shaman we're going to get into, he's pretty squishy. So I have tried to give him some sort of long-range range support for him, especially with the level 3s. Just that 18-inch range is going to allow him to be a little safer. All right, so, but yeah, so I think the spells are a nice improvement, just a little bit of tweaks, giving them a bit of a hand-to-hand buff, especially that level 1 was really terrible. All right, and then a morale buff, which I think is a lot more important than the AP buff, and then the regen as well. Spells look pretty good now. All right, so let's get into the heroes, and I followed a similar pattern with the heroes, where I've tried to, I don't want the same hero doing the same things constantly. I want the heroes to be distinctive. So I've got an elite veteran, and then I have a beast rider veteran. So I've separated that as an upgrade, and that's so I can actually give these 2 units different upgrades. So I did that for an important reason. I didn't just want a beast to be an upgrade. I actually wanted to give some different upgrades to this beast veteran. So for the elite veteran, he's sort of the guy in the army who has the most upgrades available to them, right? They're the most flexible of all the hero units. They've got a lot of upgrades here, including things like, so they've kept scrap ammo. I've given them, of course, their version of advanced tactics, which is just sort of part of it. Also given a private guard to nomads. So I've done a lot of work with nomads to make them a pretty viable unit. But I also think just making them, this is also can be pretty useful as well as a 20-man squad into these nomads. Martial prowess, where they can pick one for shooting or melee when they're in cover. I still keep those rules. Warcry, I've given them basically another version of just the charge boost. Prowl. So I have kept the I've kept the 2 abilities that work in terrain. I think that's really good because you are going to have some difficult terrain to cover, so it's worth bringing one of these 2. I've also added in a Blood Fury, which is just a really nice upgrade for them. Furious, exploding 5s and 6s on a unit that already has Furious, just a very good upgrade. So I've also given them, so I've pulled out the Relentless, and I've given them basically a lot of upgrades, where they can either go for, one, I've given them additionally, they can always have a rallying cry. So the main leader can have some upgrades, but can also just always have an additional morale mitigation for him. So he does have rallying cry. Regeneration, ambush, flying, beacon, scout. So he can be basically put with any squad. Given him some pretty good upgrades as far as hand-to-hand weapons. and I'm also giving him some decent shooting upgrades as well. So the Elite Veteran is sort of a very good catch-all version of a leader that I like. Then we have the Beast Rider Veteran. Now you can see he's got a lot smaller version, right? He can get rallying quite a bit, but he can't get with an additional ability. He can get Strider on a unit, so I've actually removed Strider on some units because I don't think army-wide Strider is it's just not a good rule. And on Beast Riders especially, there's no reason that their Beast would have Strider and others wouldn't. So I did make that an upgrade so that you can have one unit with a hero that can have Strider. He has Rallying Cry. He's got Blood Scent as well, and he's got Pack Hunter. So I have given him some upgrades, but you can kind of see he's got a lot less. He's got a double tap with his Blast or Deadly, so he actually is a lot better in hand-to-hand now. I've also, for the Beast Riders, I've given them Joust, AP1 on their impacts. I just want these guys to hit a little harder. So I think that's really good. It also aligns a little better. One thing as well is I've changed is I've added the explosive, which is just exploding 6s to get an extra hit. So I've removed reliable as these explosive spears and just given them explosive. I think this reliable just doesn't fit into the army, so I've just made them explosive here. All right, so the Beast Veteran is sort of he's limited on upgrades, but he's more of a combat monster. Then the biggest change is the Shaman. So the Shaman is sort of the weakest of the three characters. With only a quality 5 and def 6, he's a very fragile character. So you have to be very careful to even want to put this guy in a squad, or maybe not. The point being, though, but he's your only spellcaster. He starts out at caster 3, which is sort of going to be a standard. You can see the other two options don't even have a caster upgrade. You've got one caster option. He's caster 3. He's got the spells, and I've also given him one. He's got Aegis, which is going to protect him against getting sniped against spells. He's got Medicine Bag, which he can toss out regen to a friendly unit, and he's got Dark Shroud, which is passing out stealth. So he's actually a very good buffing character. I really like doing this on all my armies where I am differentiating the characters. I don't want just the same character having the same upgrades with different stats. I've really tried to make this army 3 different characters, especially the Shaman, that is just fundamentally different. And I love that he's just got some additional upgrades. He's a very good buffing character, but he's also very fragile. So that's something I like. I like this idea of when you have these buffing characters, for the most part, I want them to be fragile. I did the same things that I did in the Dao army as well. So the Shaman, a really nice touch on him as well. And as you can kind of see, he doesn't have any sort of mobility or armor upgrades. He's very, you're really just paying for the buffing ability. Like, he has not even hand. I didn't even want to give him any hand-to-hand or movement bonus. He is very much just sort of defenseless. So, and I like that. I like having these characters that are very powerful buffing, but are also, have that counter that can easily be taken out, and you have to protect them. So Nomads, I really wanted Nomads to be relevant and useful. So one thing I did is I did this a lot with Jackals, is I've lowered their defense on certain of their units. I think this actually plays very well into the army, where Jackals are sort of an army that doesn't have the ability, I don't feel, to sort of army-wide arm all their guys with armor. Instead, I have this idea in my head where they're taking the elites and their vultures, and they're sort of concentrating all their valuable armor into their elites. So the rest of the units are sort of depending on their, maybe their scout or prowl or ability to hide in terrain to sort of help that. I think it feels nice. It also just helps on the points with this Carnivore and Strider tax, giving them a def 6. Brings them a little more points viable. The other thing I've done is scrap rifles. I've lowered them to 18 inches. If they're called scrap rifles, they should be slightly less effective. I've also given them some interesting upgrades. One I've given them is a scrap shotgun, which one is worse than a shotgun. It's half range and it doesn't have any AP on it because it's not as good. It also, again, just makes them cheaper, brings them in 100 points. I have given them the ability to go for a scrap assault pistol, which I'm doing in others. It's only 6-inch range and 2 attacks, so they can go up to 120 with some hand-to-hand upgrades. I have kept some of the similar ones upgraded with the scrap rifles. One thing you notice is I've got like a scrap fusion rifle, so a lot of their guys in this army, their specialty weapons aren't quite as good as the other ones, so their fusion rifles are only 9 inches. Their rocket launchers as well is only an AP of 1. Their shred rifles, pistols are less ranged. So the idea is now their fumigator is their regular things, and they've got a hunting carbine as well. So now they've just got that 18-inch range that matches in with the rest of them. One of the things that I did give them prowl as well, but I think the big thing that I did with this army is I think the thing that's so powerful with nomads now is they can all get warning cry. This to me makes nomads extremely powerful because now you have a 10-man blob or a 20-man blob that can all have warning cry. So nomads now become very powerful because they have the ability to just really hard counter a lot of ambush heavy armies in a really powerful way. But at the same time, nomads are very squishy, so it does give your opponent some counterplay where they're going to have to try to focus on those nomads so that they don't, can get rid of them so they can come in. So I think this makes nomads very interesting, right? They are squishy. They have some offensive power, but their big utility now is this, this huge warning cry bubble for them. So I do like nomads now, especially with that upgrade. I think now nomads are a viable option, and I think almost a required option now with the ability to just counter ambush that hard. All right, Stalkers. I've made some changes. One thing I like about Devious, he added this idea of Reap on Stalkers, which I really like. I like them just having their base weapons be pretty good. I did give them the ability to upgrade. You're going to notice on some of their claw hands, I've dropped some of their AP4s to AP3s. I'm just doing that in general where I'm moving away from all this AP4 or nothing sort of thing. So I have dropped them to some AP3s. The junk sword as well is now just doesn't have an AP since it's a junk sword. It isn't as good as a regular energy sword, so I just give them no AP on their rending. But actually, their reaping blades are really great. This is a really solid unit for 75 points. A few options as well. One, I've pulled out the dodge on them, and I've actually given them the ability to either go stealth or dodge, so they can choose now. I have given them the ability to just upgrade to a jagged hook or scrap club, so I have given them that. The other thing I think is I've given them two really awesome upgrades. One I've given them is Prowl. I think that Prowl on model is still pretty good. And also Takedown. These are Stalkers, and I think Takedown works very well in this unit. Stalkers they were already good. I've knocked off some of their defense, but I think that actually makes them feel even better. They're relying a lot more on terrain, especially with Prowl, and you can even get some stealth to protect them. And that is, to me, how a lot of these lightly armored units in Jackals should function. They should, in sort of that general idea of this guerrilla tactics, they should be relying on stealth rather than armor to protect their character. So I really like Stalkers now, especially with the Stakedown. They feel like a really good unit. I really like, and this is a lot coming from Devious. Really, really nice touches to Stalkers. Elites are some of the biggest changes that I've made. So one of the things that I've done with Elites is I have at times knocked out Strider on them. I think that, for one thing, I don't think everything in an army should have Strider. I've already talked about that before. This is a good unit to remove Strider on. And one of the things that I have kept the Carnivore and Relentless, but and I've kept the Def 4 on them. The idea being that they're elites with the limited sort of resources that Jackals have. They sort of concentrate their resources into their elites and their vultures here. So one thing I have done, their scrap heavy rifles though are 18-inch range. That's going to synergize a little better with Carnivore. And then I've given them a lot of interesting upgrades. So one, I've actually allowed them to go all shotguns and also all shred rifles. And this is the idea that they have access to some of the more non-scrap version of these weapons, right? They've got, for instance, a fully functioning shred rifle, a fully functional plasma rifle, or a fully functional shotgun. So in other words, these elites with their limited resources, they can actually pool those limited resources into these elites, which makes sense, and that's pretty historical as well when you think about options. I've also just given them some upgrade options. So the other thing I've done across the board is I've just given them a fusion rifle. Whether nomads or wherever, fusion rifles are just part of the army now. The Fumigator stays, the rocket launcher, and the missile launcher, I've given them an 18 and a 30-inch range for that, but I've kept them away from like las cannons as well. Another thing that I've made them a lot more viable as well is actually giving them these attachments, where I've given them, like, every one of them can get a fuser attachment or a flamer attachment, a shred attachment, and a rocket attachment. So in other words, they can also given them a lot of flexibility on how they want to arm the squad. The last thing I did is actually here I've given them 2 defensive upgrades. One is this clunky heavy armor, which is basically, I really like this. I like the idea of giving them protected, but also slow. And what that means is that I always think about it in the idea of them having sort of this ability. This armor, they can get more armor, but it's not going to be fitted as well because they're sort of grabbing it from other races. So I think this is actually really flavorful, that you actually are taking a disadvantage of slow because it's sort of not fit to the rest of them. So I really like this. I think it's this clunky heavy armor. It feels a little more, and it also sort of fits and helps the point cost as well. Again, makes them a little slower, but also gives them that little extra protection. So I like elites as well. I think they're a much more flavorful, but also more useful unit. Vultures, with vultures, I did adjust the hybrid tax on them by giving limited on their pistols. That's I've been doing that for other armies. I've also given them a shotgun upgrade, which I think is very useful. I've also given them the explosive sphere. That's the same. It's just exploding 6s and not the reliable, which I think is sort of an odd interaction. I've already spoken about that. All right. For the scrap pistols, I've given them a zapper gun, which is just a 4-shot. Again, I wanted to a little better maximize this, so it's 4 shots on explosive. I've given them a fuser rifle, but it's a scrap version, and I've given them a fumigator as well. Also, just the junk sword and the claw hand, I've lowered some of the APs on them as well, given them similar upgrades. I've also given them a stem, both with the elites and the vultures, given them stems, which is just regeneration. And that's, again, trying to say that the limited resources that they have for Jackals, they're going to their elites. They're going to their vultures and their elites. All right, trackers. I like this idea of giving them good shot as well with their hunting carbines. It's not going to matter. This isn't going to affect the price because it's the way sniper works. It's going to base it off this price. But one thing I've done is I've lowered it to 18-inch range. I don't want these 30. It doesn't fit well to have these 30-inch range weapons, so I've lowered it and I've given them actually an ability to go up to 24 inches, but not the 30-inch range. It just doesn't fit with the army. They do still have carnivore and good shot, stealth, and strider, so they have a lot of upgrades in here, but the less death helps that out. I've also given them a warning cry and a scout and a beacon, and they still have charged ammo as an upgrade. The other thing I've done is I've actually given them the ability to, one, get a rocket pistol or fumigator and a heavy shotgun. This actually can be combined with charged ammo, so they can ambush in, and then they can, shoot their fumigators. They can actually hit some pretty, heavy AP on that turn. So I like this idea that you can run trackers long range, but you can actually run them short range as assault troops with just some shotguns that ambushing in with charged ammo. So this unit is now a lot more flexible. You can do a lot of different things with this unit. All right, Hounds have stayed similar other than the fact that I've just lowered their defense by 1. And that's it. Yeah, Hounds have stayed similar. Nothing too much to say about Hounds. Beast Riders have changed. Of course, I've just upped the quality on Beast Riders. I think that's a big change. Made the explosive happen. And I've given them some additional upgrades. 1, Devour, Protected. And then I've given them Fearless as well. So also some upgrades as well just to help with the morale mitigation. Allows Beast Riders actually to be a little further apart. So you've got some good upgrades now on Beast Riders that I think fit. I've also given them Jowls. I just want these guys to hit a little harder. So they've got now AP 1 on their impact hits. Beast Riders feel good. Beast Gunners, I've tweaked a little bit. One thing I've done is because they're carrying these heavy weapons, they don't get bounding by default. I've also started them, again, the scrap machine guns. I've lowered them by 6 inches. They're not as good as regular machine guns. But I've also given them some useful upgrades. One I've given them is a more shorter ranged option. So they've got a hunting carbine. They've got a rocket launcher. They've got a heavy fusion rifle. And they've got a Gauss cannon, which I really like this idea of them. Some of these weapons, I have them stealing it from other races. So in this particular, they grabbed a scrap Gauss cannon and they've just made this. So actually, this is a pretty nice upgrade as well. The other thing I've done is I've made the Beast Gunners a little bit more of a support unit. They have the advanced tactics on them, and they've also got their rallying cry as well. So actually, these Beast Gunners also can be a little bit more of a support unit. And if you really need to, just for backwards compatibility, I have allowed you to put bounding. So I mean, I've kept some of these upgrades just for backwards compatibility, so you still can bring bounding in the unit. I just don't think it's necessary anymore, but you can do that. And then yeah, rallying cry. So this is actually more of a defensive support unit as well. So Beast Gunners are now, they've got that different role. Great Beasts, one thing I've done is I've lowered the def on one of these Great Beasts. I think that I don't think that their Great Beast should be as tough as like a tank or something. I've given it some good upgrades, a Fearless and an Aura of Fury with Furious. So this is a really nice combination where this is a little bit more of a hand-to-hand support unit that actually can bring this Aura of Fury and Furious. I've actually started it out with an AP3 Deadly. So now this thing is a little more of a dedicated deadly unit that can actually go the other way and go the massive form with Joust. So I've switched it up. There isn't a lot of deadly in this army, so I think it's providing two different ways to play the beast. One, you can go a deadly route. The other way, you can go a little more of a impact and massive horde route that I've tweaked a little bit on the AP. All right, so again, made the Great Beast with also some support and some morale mitigation characteristics as well. Giving it fast, and also I love this thing that Devious put in there about a transport 6. So they actually has a small transport capacity as well, which I think is really nice. Long net, I've changed a lot, lowered its defense. You can see as well, I've tweaked the upgrades so that you can easily play this thing at 2,000. So that's just something that I think is vital to the army. You need to be able to play this at 2,000 if that's going to be a standard. Tweak some things. So the stomp attack, I've generally dropped it down to just the single stomp. The heavy railgun, I've changed to like some lock on. I don't like indirect when I see these things. So this does have some long range firepower in it. So you know, 6 attacks, deadly. This is pretty tough. I've also given it things like a protected, so it can be a little protected, and also a spotter. So it's got a long neck, so I think the ability to give it a plus 6-inch range is really nice, and it fits with the, again, I like on some of these bigger units to actually have a bit of a support as well. So spotter, I think, fits well with the army. And I've tweaked some of the guns. One, I've given it basically a mass shooting version, which is a graviton cannon, which is just 24 inches, 18 shots, and ignores cover AP2. It's a pretty nasty gun, and it fits well with the quality 4, right? This being only quality 4, you do need a lot of massive shots happening here. I have just given his hunting tusk an optional upgrade. And I've also, thing that I've done here is I've actually provided a fumigator array or a scrap heavy rifles array. We're just giving it some extra shots at close range. So this thing can move up. It is slow now. So the long neck I have it is actually slow, but it actually can get some point blank weapons. And this is the idea for me is that they actually have Jackal models like hanging onto the side of the long neck and like shooting weapons. So that's the idea here. Just giving it a little extra short range defensive support as well. Yeah, and I think the long neck feels a little better, especially with slow. It's not, you know, it has a bit of it feels better. It feels better. All right, Mastodon. So the first thing you're gonna notice is that just for sake, I've broken up the Mastodon and the ancient Mastodon. So I've allowed basically a smaller version of the Mastodon at only 18 tough to be able to be played, and I've lowered that transport to 21, and you can upgrade up to 20 to 11, and then upgrade up to 21 or 2. So that just, again, it's less flat combined stuff. I have made this thing a little more of a Great Tusk, so it's got these 8 attacks. And then you can just basically, again, I've made this thing so that it's just hand-to-hand, and then you can upgrade the shooting weapons. It's less of this automatic hybrid unit where you can actually just add on some of these shooting range weapons. Again, I've also just added on some additional weapons that they can tweak as well, given it an Aura of Fury and given it Fearless as well. So the Mastodon just feels better. And then you have the Ancient Mastodon, and the Ancient Mastodon is very similar. I've tried to get it below 700 points so that it can be played in 2,000 points. Tough 24, similar attacks. And then again, just you're going to see here, I've got the ability to just bring in this massive jaw so that it's really hitting hard on the AP. You know, this thing is pretty deadly. Again, with the transport buffs to it, I think this is supposed to be transport 11. That's just a mistake. Yeah, but you can sort of see the Mastodon is a lot more. So a lot of work has went into the army, and I hope it helps. Check it out. Let me know what you think of it. Let's get into a competitive list. All right, for a competitive list, so one thing I try to do in these armies is I don't want them to just be good. I want all the units to be viable. So when I bring these competitive lists, I like to try and make them a little more, what's the word? To have a little more variety, right? So in this one, I've got a Beast Veteran that I've got with the Blood Scent, so that's just the +1 to hit, so he's also got that jagged hook. So he's actually got a lot. This army has a lot more deadly in it, which I think the original Jackals army is really missing deadly. So that I've then got a Shaman where I've got Medicine Bag. So it's just, so one, he's got that regen that he can hand out, be sort of a support unit. 2 units of Nomads with Warning Cry, and I've given them Scrap Shotguns. This puts them at 110 points. Now they only have a 6-inch range, but they really are a very good unit that can just protect against ambush. I think Nomads now or you really almost need 1 or 2 units of Nomads now in a Jackals army because of that ability to have that 10 strong on Warning Cry. 2 units of Stalkers that I've got, 1 with Takedown and 1 with Prowl. I think Stalkers now are really solid. So I've got 1 guy who can do a Takedown and then another upgrade with Prowl. So again, they're just, you know, really using that terrain to their benefit. I've then got a unit of Elites. In this one, I've added some. So what I've basically done is I've added it with 2 rocket launchers and some shred rifles that I have both protected and regen. So at 340 points, feels really good. You sort of need to move them in range, but once you get within 18, they can really just sort of sit there and pump out a lot of shots. I've got a 10-man unit of Vultures that I've given them the Explosive Spears and also regen. 2 Trackers, 2 3-mans of Trackers that I've given Fumigators to. So these are just really good units that can just scout up and just walk up and just, you know, hit something with 3 blast attacks. So I think that's really solid, by the way. Trackers, I think, are a lot more useful. 2 units of Hounds that I just have with, you know, just stock. So some good chaff. They're fast. They've got Strider. They can contest objectives. I've got a combined unit of Beast Riders that's going to be running with the Beast Rider Veteran. I've actually given them Lances, and I've given them Protected as well. So a pretty good unit that I've chose the Protective upgrade for them. I've got some Beast Gunners. Beast Gunners, I've given them Rallying Cry and Pack Hunter. So with the Beast Gunners, they're expensive, but they actually have the ability to, you know, they've got the advanced tactics and they've got the Rallying Cry. So this is a really good support unit that's also can pump out about 24 rending shots as well. Really, really solid unit. It's expensive, but if you can protect it, it's a very good unit. And then finally, I just have a Great Beast that I've given the aura of Fury and Furious. So again, he's sort of going in. This is a really solid army that has a very good sort of 18, like a 6-inch to 18-inch range. A lot of punching power in here. It's got some staying power as well. It doesn't heavily rely on difficult terrain, but it's got just enough of those prowls that can really just, you know, it's got enough so you can generally get enough difficult terrain or cover to sort of protect them. I think the army is super solid. I'm sure you could probably do different things with it. I've tried to include a lot of different weapons in this army. So that is Jackals. Hey guys, thanks for watching. You know, Jackals it did take me a while. I really have tried to invest a lot of time. I try to do that with all the armies. I try to really just invest a lot of time and energy into these armies. My next army is going to be HDF, but hey, love to get feedback, like, subscribe, and comment, and hey, send me your custom armies as well if you want a review. Thanks everyone.